What's up guys, and welcome back to Retro Gamer Gen X's Retro Gaming channel. And in today's video we're going to be checking out the history of third generation retro video game consoles, kind of like the Nintendo here behind me. Basically the console generation that rose from the ashes of the video game crash and made the industry what it is today. Now if you guys missed my other two videos, I did do Generation 1 and Generation 2. I'm going to go ahead and post a link to those up above as well. So if you guys are new to the channel, basically at the end of every year I put together these history videos, these compilation videos of all my look-ats and all my retro video game history videos through the years and also through this year, and put the new ones in this year. And what my goal is basically make the biggest and most complete video game history videos here on YouTube. So without any further ado guys, let's go ahead and check out the third generation of video game consoles.
Sega Video Game SG-1000.
The story of Sega starts in World War II in 1940. American businessmen Martin Bromley, Irving Bromberg, and James Humpert started Standard Games in Hawaii to supply coin-operated games such as slot machines to American bases during the war. The business also served the civilian market as well. It was successful, but after the war they sold Standard Games off and created a new company called Service Games, with its main focus being games for the military. In 1952, the U.S. government banned slot machines in U.S. territories, which took a chunk out of Service Games' pockets. To marginalize its losses, they established Service Games of Japan to provide slot machines to U.S. bases in Japan. A year later, they started Service Games of Panama to control their entities worldwide. In 1954, Service Games released a slot machine named Diamond 3-Star, and was the first product with the shortened Service Games name, abbreviated to Sega, on it. In the next few years, they expanded their business to distribute machines in South Korea, the Philippines, and South Vietnam. By 1960, criminal organizations were starting to use slot machines in their unlicensed gambling houses. Because of this, the US government started an investigation into illegal gambling. Service Games saw that this was the end of their lucrative slot machine business, and dissolved Service Games of Japan on May 31st. 3 days later, Bromley started two new businesses to take over the business that Service Games left behind: Nihon Gorako Busan and Nihon Kenkai Seizu. The two newly formed companies bought all the assets from Service Games of Japan. Kenkai Seizu started business as Sega Incorporated and focused solely on the slot machine business. Guraku Busan, doing business as Ultimatic, was a distributor of coin-op machines such as jukeboxes and pinball. In 1964, the companies merged into one. In 1965, Nihon Guraku Busan acquired Rosen Enterprises, another coin-op game company that was owned by David Rosen. After the acquisition, Nihon Guraku Busan changed its name to Sega Limited, and stopped leasing games to military bases and focused solely on distributing coin-op amusement machines such as Rockola jukeboxes, Williams pinball machines, and Midway shooting games. Also at this time, Rosen was made CEO of Sega Limited. By the late 1960s, Sega had been distributing machines, but many of the machines broke and had to be fixed. Sega got sick of trying to outsource the parts needed to quickly get the machines running again, so they decided to make their own parts for the machines. This quickly evolved into Sega making their first electromechanical game called Periscope. With its amazing gameplay, effects, lights, and sounds, it was quite a success for Sega. In 1969, Sega Limited was sold off to American investor Gulf and Western Industries. In 1973, Sega made their first video game-based arcade game, Pongtron, a Pong clone. In 1974, Sega Limited changed their name again to Sega Enterprises Limited. Sega enjoyed success in the arcade video game market in the 1970s. So much so, it licensed Frogger and created the famous 3D shooter game Zaxxon. They acquired Gremlin Industries, a microprocessor-based arcade game manufacturer, in 1983. Also around this time, they acquired another company named Esco Baruki, a coin-op distributor owned by Hayao Nakayama. Nakayama was put into the president position at Sega's Japanese operations. But by 1982, the arcade industry started seeing a downfall in profits. Golf and Western sold off its North American arcade division to Bally Manufacturing in 1983, but retained American R&D division and its Sega Enterprises Limited division. Right around this time, Nakayama wanted to get into the home computer market. They started development of the SC-3000. It was an 8-bit computer powered by a Z80 processor. Almost simultaneously, they heard that the game company Nintendo was creating a video game console for the home market. Sega wanted to get into this market as well. They took the same technology from the SC-3000 computer and turned it into the home video game console named the SG-1000. Both systems were released in 1983. The SG-1000 became a success for Sega. Released the same day as Nintendo released the Famicom, it was only predicted to sell about 50,000 units by the end of the year. But by the end of 1983, they had sold over 160,000 units. However, the success didn't last. Due to Nintendo having third-party developers working on their games, the Famicom started to outsell the SG-1000 by tenfold. Also in 1983, Golf and Western decided to divest the rest of their assets in Sega. Rosen stepped down as CEO and partnered with Nakayama to buy out Sega Enterprises. After the acquisition, Nakayama was named CEO of Sega Enterprises. In 1984, Sega released an updated version of the SG-1000 called the SG-1000 Mark II, or Mark II for short. This system was backward compatible with both the SC-3000 and the SC-1000's games. The case design was changed, putting the expansion port in the front, and it had detachable controllers as well. The SG-1000 was discontinued in 1984 and the SG-1000 Mark II and SC-3000 in 1986 to make room for the next video game console, the Sega Mark III, which eventually became the Master System. The SG series of game consoles had a 3-year lifespan from the launch of the SG-1000 in 1983 until the discontinuation of the SG-1000 Mark II in 1986. The SG series of consoles sold over 1.4 million units in total. Although not a huge success, it was successful enough to kickstart Sega into the video game industry, and was Sega's first video game console.
What's it like to play the Nintendo Entertainment System? Entertainment System. Now you're playing with power.
The NES story starts in the arcades of the early 1980s. Nintendo's success with games such as Donkey Kong led Nintendo's president Harushi Yamauchi to call for a game console based on arcade machines like Galaxian and Donkey Kong. Originally, it was supposed to be a 16-bit home computer with floppy drives and a keyboard, but Yamauchi rejected this plan. He wanted a cheaper system that people didn't need to be technophiles to be able to use. At this point, Masuki Yorama began the design by October of 1982 and had a test model or prototype built. However, no programming tools were available, so programming started on the NEC PC-8001 computer, or the PC-88. The PC-88 connected to a grid of LEDs to create the graphics for the games. The project was named Gamecom, but this name was actually changed to Famicom with the suggestion of Yorama's wife. The Famicom was heavily influenced by the ColecoVision. Nintendo saw how much better the games looked on the Coleco as opposed to other consoles like the Atari 2600. They really thought that they would be competing with Coleco in the future and wanted to come up with something that could produce arcade quality graphics. The console was released on July 15, 1983, only in Japan, with 3 games being released with the system at the time: Donkey Kong, Donkey Kong Jr., and Popeye. The console released with some issues due to some manufacturing defects. There were some issues with the chips inside that caused the system to crash. But after a recall, the Famicom enjoyed success, much success, and by 1984 was the best-selling console in Japan. Also in 1984, Nintendo agreed to have third-party publishers make games on it. The first two publishers were Namco and Hudson Soft. They agreed to a deal for a 30% fee to Nintendo for console licensing and production cost. This was an industry standard in the video game market up until 2010. Now Nintendo had its sights on North America. However, they were still skeptical of going into the market alone. In 1983, Nintendo started negotiations with Atari to market the Famicom under Atari's name in North America. The deal was supposed to be signed at the CES show in 1983. However, Atari saw a Nintendo Donkey Kong Coleco cartridge being used in a Coleco display. And at this point, they nixed the deal with Nintendo. Now Nintendo decided to go for it on their own. The first idea was to package it as the Nintendo Advanced Video Game System, or AVS. This would include a repackaged Famicom, a keyboard, a cassette, a data recorder, and a wireless joystick, and a basic ROM cartridge. Nintendo decided against this as it would be too expensive for the regular consumer. And with the video game crash, they were worried that the console and computer just wouldn't sell. So Nintendo first used the Famicom hardware in North America in the Versus arcade cabinets. This was basically just a test to see how gamers would react to what was really a home video game console in a cabinet. It was a huge success. The Versus system became the highest grossing arcade cabinet by 1985 in the United States. With this, Nintendo went ahead and designed the North American Famicom system. The system would have a front-loading assembly that resembled a VCR for user familiarity. It also helped prevent ESD, or electronic static discharge, in dry climates like Nevada or Arizona. The new case was designed by Lance Barr. At this point, the Nintendo AVS system was renamed to the Nintendo Entertainment System. The change came due to Nintendo wanting to distance itself from the video game market after the crash, and that's why it's not called the Nintendo Video Game System. It released in two test markets, in New York City in October of 1985 and in Los Angeles in February of 1986. It was very successful in both of those markets, so Nintendo decided to release the NES nationwide on September 27, 1986. Now, as technology advanced, obviously game consoles are going to be discontinued. The NES was discontinued in 1995, giving it a 9-year run in the North American market. Now, the Famicom, on the other hand, was discontinued in the year 2000. So it gave the console a 17-year run on the market in Japan. Of course, over its lifetime, and all the different iterations from the Famicom to the NES, it sold about 62 million units, the best-selling console up to this point.
Oh, hey, you guys are still here. If you guys dig the content, go ahead and hit that like, that subscribe, and that notification bell. That way you guys get notifications every time I drop new content like this. Well, I'm going to go ahead and get back to this game. You guys go ahead and get back to the video here.
Sega challenges you with the ultimate video game. The Sega Master System, with twice as much memory as any other video game. Advanced video technology like scrolling backgrounds, graphics in 64 colors, digital sounds, and light phasers.
Fresh!
And you can add to the excitement with sports pads, control sticks, and the first video games ever in 3D.
Sega's the one.
The Sega Master System. The challenge will always be there.
The story of the Sega Master System really starts in 1983. With the release of its first game console, the SG-1000 in Japan, it was released on the same day as Nintendo's Famicom, but unfortunately did not see the success that Nintendo did. In 1984, Sega's parent company, Golf and Western Industries, divested in non-core businesses, including Sega. Sega now owned itself, and put Nakayama as CEO of the newly founded Sega Enterprises. Also in 1984, Sega released another console called the SG-1000 Mark II. This featured several hardware revisions and detachable controllers. Then, in 1985, Sega released the Sega Mark III, which was another redesign of the original SG-1000. It was engineered by Hideki Soto and Masami Ishiwaka. According to Sato, the console was designed due to the limitations of the SG-1000's GPU, and they wanted something that would be able to compete with the graphics of the Nintendo. So they designed a new graphics chip based on the Sega System 2 arcade board. The Mark III was released in October of 1985 in Japan only, but they had problems finding publishers due to the licensing agreements that Nintendo already had set up with most companies. And once again, Sega had a console that was not very successful in Japan. Sega knew they had a great video game system and wanted to release it worldwide to compete with the likes of Nintendo and Atari. In 1986, Sega formed Sega of America with Bruce Lorry, Nintendo of America's former vice president of sales, heading this group. Rebranded as the Master System, the system itself was redesigned, appealing more to the American market. It was first revealed in the Summer CES show in Chicago in 1986. The console itself was launched in September of 1986 at a price of $200 in the United States. Sega hoped to sell more than 700,000 units by the end of 1986, but unfortunately, their projections fell short, only selling 125,000 units, while Nintendo at the same point sold more than 1.1 million units. Just like in Japan, Nintendo had licensing agreements with most American publishers, leading to Sega to develop pretty much their own video game library and not having the help of third-party developers. In 1987, Sega sold the distribution rights to the Master System to toy company Tonka. Nintendo had marketed the Nintendo Entertainment System as a toy, so Sega felt that if they marketed it with a toy company, it might increase sales. Tonka had purchased Kenner Toys in 1987, and after a horrible Christmas season, funds were running low for Tonka. In 1988, there was an EEPROM shortage. Tonka didn't want to buy the expensive EEPROMs, and not being able to distribute very many games for the Master System, further decreasing sales for Sega. Also in 1987, the Mark III was re-released as the Master System in Japan and did not sell very well. Now Sega had to move to more markets. They closed the deal in 1987 to have the Master System distributed by Mastertronic in the United Kingdom. Advanced orders of the system were very high, but unfortunately the demand was not met, as units were not made until Boxing Day, making shipments late. Mastertronic sold the rest of their shares to Virgin to form Virgin Mastertronic, which took over all European distribution in 1988. By 1990, the Master System was the best-selling console in Europe, selling more than 918,000 consoles, greater than Nintendo's 655,000 units. This had European developers pushing to develop for the console, unlike in Japan or the United States. The Sega Master System was also very successful in Brazil, being marketed by Tectoy. The Sega Master System, although not initially successful, it did enjoy success in Europe, Brazil, and other parts of the world. Being released in Japan in 1985 and being discontinued in Brazil in 1998 gave the console an amazing 13-year run, with worldwide sales between Sega and Tectoy ranging between 20 to 21 million units.
Atari just reinvented the video game with this, the Atari 7800. Incredible, huh? So powerful it plays like the best arcade game with real joysticks, right? So advanced it plays super games, computer games no other video game system ever played. Just look at these. It even plays all Atari 2600 games. Great, huh? Hey, oh, the new Atari 7800. We reinvented the video game.
The story of the Atari 7800 starts in 1982. After the release of the Atari 5200, Atari was already getting complaints from consumers that the system was not that great. Controller issues, no backward compatibility with the 2600, and most of the games were the same arcade ports that were already on the 2600. Sales figures supported this, as the system was not selling well. Atari knew it had to come up with a new video game system to compete with the ColecoVision. But after Warner Communications took over the company from Nolan Bushnell, most of the brilliant engineers that Atari had left. So for the first time in Atari's history, they had to outsource a company to design their new game system. Right about this time, a small startup company named General Computer Corporation was making arcade mods for popular arcade machines, one of which was Super Missile Attack, a mod of Atari's Missile Command. Atari got wind of this and sued General Computer Corporation for copyright infringement. But once Atari saw the mods, they cut a deal with GCC to hire them to produce the mods under Atari's name. They also had them start developing arcade games for Atari as well, such as Food Fight and Quantum. Then Atari had them start development on the then called Atari 3600 video game console. It was to be backwards compatible with the 2600 and have arcade quality graphics that can compete with the ColecoVision. Development started in 1983 and was ready for production in 1984 with the launch of 15 titles, a high score cart, and it even had a keyboard accessory. It was renamed the Atari 7800 Pro System. But Atari was going through its own changes. The video game crash started in 1983 and with it took a lot of profit out of the gaming industry. Atari was at the heart of it due to so many bad games being released on the 2600. Warner Communications knew this and they wanted out. In 1984, Atari's consumer division was bought out by former Commodore president Jack Tramiel. It was Jack's decision to cancel the Atari 7800 project and shelve it due to the gaming consoles not being profitable after the crash, and Atari focused more on its computer division. Fast forward a couple years to 1986, with the release of Nintendo's NES and seeing how successful it was, Tramiel decided to unshelf the Atari 7800. Unfortunately for Atari, by this time the system was outdated and really was not a competitor to the NES or the Sega Master System. The system wasn't that successful, selling just over 100,000 units in 1986, far below what Nintendo had sold. A total of 57 games were released for the system. It was discontinued in 1992, along with the 2600 and the 8-bit line of computers.
This is the Nintendo video game system. It plays only cartridge games. This is the new Atari XE system. It plays cartridge and disc-based games. Disc drive sold separately, and only Atari comes with a real joystick. Both have guns, but only Atari comes with the target game Bug Hunt. Nintendo has a toy robot, but only Atari gives you a keyboard for playing advanced computer games. It even comes with the amazing Flight Simulator 2 cartridge. The new Atari XE video game system. Unbeatable.
The story of the XEGS starts way back in the 1970s. Nolan Bushnell had sold Atari to Time Warner Communications in 1976 to help pull Atari out of its financial bind. In 1977, Atari started development of a new 8-bit game console. As popular as the Atari 2600 was, it was underpowered and Atari knew this. The top executives at Atari saw how successful the personal computer market was becoming with the release of the Commodore PET, Apple II, and the TRS-80. In fact, 1977 is known as the year of the personal computer because of this. The top brass at Atari took the technology from the 8-bit game system that was being developed and turned it into the Atari 8-bit line of computers, the 400 and the 800. Nolan Bushnell and most of the engineers at Atari saw this as bad marketing and started to leave Atari at this point. Fast forward a few years to the early 1980s. Atari now had competition in the video game console market with the Intellivision and the ColecoVision, and they knew they had to come up with a system that had arcade quality graphics and sound. They reverse engineered the Atari 8-bit computer into a game console that we all know as the Atari 5200. In essence, the 5200 is an Atari 8-bit computer under the hood, but Atari made it so it was incompatible with the 8-bit computer carts, did not support a floppy or cassette drive, nor was it backboard compatible to the 2600 without the additional 2600 add-on. Along with the horrible analog controllers and the same arcade ports that were already on the 2600, consumers just didn't buy the system. It was right about this time in 1983 that the video game crash started, diminishing the video game market and making it unprofitable. A lot of companies pulled out of the market, and Time Warner was no different. In 1984, they sold Atari to former Commodore president Jack Tramiel. When Jack took over the company, his primary focus was on computers. He even shelved the then completed Atari 7800 game console because he thought releasing it after the crash would be unprofitable. But Nintendo released the NES in 1985 and took the gaming world by storm, showing video game consoles could be profitable once again. In 1986, Atari then released the 7800, but it was too late to compete with Nintendo and another new competitor, Sega. After seeing that the 7800 was not going to be the success they thought it would be, Atari had to come up with something quick to try to compete in the market. They went back to the hybrid console computer idea that they had with the 5200, but this time it would be compatible with the 8-bit carts, support drives, and have a keyboard, light gun, and even have BASIC on the ROM. It was marketed as a video game console that could be expanded to a full-blown computer. So Atari started development of the Atari XEGS. The XEGS is really a redesigned Atari 65XE computer that was made to be a standalone video game console. The system was as powerful, if not more powerful, than either the NES or the Sega Master System. Atari thought they had a hit on their hands. The shell of the system was designed to fit the times, a radical case and fluorescent colored buttons along with the Buck Rogers styled light gun. It also had a redesigned detachable full QWERTY keyboard. But the reality of the system is far different than what it appeared. Atari made these systems as cheap as they could to get rid of the 8-bit component inventory, getting ready to discontinue the 8-bit computer systems, making way for the 16-bit line of ST computers. These systems are plagued with issues because of this. From failing system ROMs, cold solder joints, bad RAM, and MMU issues, the system was starting to get a bad reputation. Initial sales of the unit looked good, selling out of the 100,000 units that they made during the Christmas season, but sales slumped afterward as the build quality issues started to pop up. Also by this time, most people already had an NES or a Sega Master System. Atari supported the XEGS until 1992, when it was discontinued with the 2600, 7800, and the Atari 8-bit line of computers. The Atari XEGS had a 5-year lifespan from 1987 to 1992. It sold over 100,000 units and is considered to be the last 8-bit computer Atari produced. Or was it a console? You guys be the judge.